John Gottfried. I'm a developer evangelist at Twilio. For those of you who aren't familiar, Twilio is a cloud communications platform. That means that we build infrastructure APIs so that developers can add phone functionality to their web applications. So I'm really here today to talk to you about using cloud services to supplement and boost your business. I know that a lot of the folks here are in desktop applications, but that doesn't mean you can't use cloud services. They're very robust and they don't necessarily replace your existing tools. They're purely there to supplement and allow you to focus on building your product while using other people's products that they've developed for a specific purpose. So, why the cloud? Well, there have always been sort of tool sets available for developers, but oftentimes it was left up to you to manage and maintain these tools. The cloud has sort of changed that model and brought about an infrastructure as a service model that really makes it easier on developers. There are thousands of cloud services, many more than I could even fit on this slide, that purely exist for a single purpose. There are cloud services that only do email. There are cloud services that only do notifications. There are cloud services that build customer support systems. And they're all there so that you can not think about building that part of your application. You know how to build your application the way your customers want, and these service providers know how to build applications that you can use as a developer. So it allows you to reduce development time, ultimately increase scalability, with a very little upfront investment. A lot of these services are pay-as-you-go. They don't have any setup fee, and they really just allow you to use what you want. So cloud is sort of a big buzzword these days, and it's very difficult to explain. But I have a little analogy from a guy named Andy Harjanto about why you might want to use a cloud service rather than an embedded solution or a downloaded solution. So imagine you're moving to a new city. You have a couple options for housing. You could buy a house, you could rent an apartment, you could build a house, and each of them has its pros and cons. So let's say you want to build your own house. So that's a pretty awesome looking house, if I do say so. Has some weird squiggly lines, looks like a spaceship of sorts. And hey, if you build your own house, you can make it look just like that. It's customized the exact way you want it. However, it's extremely expensive to build your own home. It takes a lot of upfront money. It's extremely complicated. You have to know what contractors to hire. You have to know what materials to buy. You have to know how to get zoning permits. It's ultimately kind of a big pain. And your house probably won't end up looking like that. It could very well end up looking like that. If you don't get the right tools, if you don't get the right contractors, your house is going to fall in on itself and be worthless in a couple of years. And the same applies to products. You know very well how to build products that serve your customers' needs, but you don't necessarily have the deep industry knowledge to develop, for example, an entire CRM, unless that's your business, of course, or to develop a full email server. There are expert companies doing this, so you don't need to develop two products at once when you're only selling one. So, what about renting? Well, you lose a lot of the customization. You really only have so many choices. You can't choose your own features, you can't choose your own design. However, you have a landlord there that's going to take care of maintenance, going to take care of upkeep. You probably don't have to pay very much up front, and you can really leave it to the experts who have already built these successful homes. Just think about a data center, for example. That's my data center in my closet. It's a cloud data center, I think. And it's something I maintain myself. I've poured thousands of dollars into building this little subset of computers that serves my business needs perfectly, right? I don't really have that many more customers than that, so why do I need anything bigger? But hey, when I get that call at 3 a.m. about my computer being on fire, it's not fun to deal with, and I honestly have no idea how to fix it. You know, it's almost as bad as having a baby, right? Fires are worse than babies. So the point of cloud services really is to leave it to the experts. You know, as I said, you know how to build your business and they know how to build theirs. Why build something that you're not an expert on, that won't scale with your business and will really divert your focus from your core offering? It's not time or cost effective. Now, a lot of people sort of have hesitations about using cloud services, right? Because they're ultimately beyond your control. You have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And when something goes wrong, you can't be there to fix it. There's definitely something satisfying about being able to fix a problem yourself. But you know, that's really taken out of your hands. However, cloud infrastructures have really evolved to a place where they are stable and they are reliable, and they have massive teams of specialized people on hand to deal with problems. They have IT staffs that run their data centers 24/7. They have security experts to make sure no one steals your data. They have deep industry knowledge in their product. And a lot of them are really pay-as-you-go, right? So even if something goes wrong for 5 minutes, you're not losing thousands of dollars. And ultimately, you're all already using cloud services, right? You use search engines, you use email servers, you use hosting companies, you use Facebook, you use Twitter, you use Yahoo. These are all services built on cloud infrastructures. A cloud infrastructure simply means that it's a distributed system of parts that combine to make a successful application. And the amazing thing about this distributed network is that it creates an economy of scale, right? So that you get the cheapest product that's still extremely powerful, because in a lot of these cases, 20% of the users make up 80% of the revenue, right? You have huge companies spending millions of dollars on Amazon that make it possible for you to spend $20 a month. So why cloud communications? Why does Twilio even do that? Well, how many of you have a phone? I assume all of you, yeah, in some form or another. So we sort of found that developers build great software, and the majority of developers have no idea how phones work. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever tried to do a SIP relay, but it is extremely complicated and extremely specialized. So we decided to build a system that took advantage of phones. Phones are the single most popular real-time communication protocol of all time, right? There are more phone calls, more minutes on phones spent on anything else in the history of humanity, right? And it's worldwide. Phones are almost ubiquitous in every culture around the world. And so we wanted to make a tool that allowed developers to take advantage of this existing legacy network with essentially dumb devices so that they could build it the way they wanted with tools that they understood. Cloud communications really connects the digital world with this physical world of phones. So that being said, I'm going to jump right in. I have a couple use cases to talk about, cloud services that you can use, and different ways that you can sort of supplement your existing business. So, how many of you use any kind of analytics software at all? Okay, about half of you. So, have you all seen the funnel before? The sales funnel, right? So this funnel basically starts out with tons of money in it. You know, all of the potential dollars you could ever earn. And at the end, you're left with a very small portion of that. That's even the case for large companies, right? It's not anything specific to small businesses. However, using analytics software gives you immense insight into why this funnel is narrowing down. And if you can even optimize that 1 percentage point or 2 percentage points, it can drastically increase your business. So how do you figure out what the best way to sell your product is? How do you figure out how to increase retention, increase sales? You really have to use analytics software. But analytics software is an extremely complicated thing to build. I've certainly built it before. I assume many of you have tried to build it before as well. Sure, you can figure out how many people are going to your website. You can figure out where they're going. But you know, when you want to build that report that tells you why half of them clicked X button and half of them didn't, that takes 10 hours of work, not 5 minutes of drag and drop. So using these analytic solutions really allows you to quickly and cheaply improve your sales and improve your reliability, because you don't have to worry about building out the reports since experts have already created them for you. A great example of that is A/B testing. How many of you are familiar with the concept of A/B testing? Okay, most of you. So essentially, A/B testing means that you make two versions of your product, and in real time, you're testing which one of them is more effective. So, for example, here you might have a sign-up form on the top of the page compared to the bottom of the page, and you're tracking which one performs better, so that you know in the end that maybe 50% more sign-ups come when the sign-up form is at the bottom of the page there. So, A/B testing is a great example of how you can use this data and use existing tool sets to sort of improve your sales, right? Even if that only gets you 20 more sales or 25 more sales, isn't that worth it to relocate a sign-up form? I mean, I certainly think it is. And it's real data, right? It's not a guess. You could ask your customers, and you could really find out what they think is right. But when you're dealing with thousands or even hundreds of customers, that's not really efficient to go ask them all what they think is right. You can only really track that by gathering the data and analyzing it. And luckily, there are tons of cloud services that can do this for you. Optimizely is one, Unbounce is one, even Google Analytics can do A/B testing, and they're all extremely cheap. For example, Optimizely is $19 a month, right? That's not very much money to possibly get massive increases in sales, or even incremental increases in sales, right? If you're spending $19 to make a $100 sale, that's great. And they really give you sort of deep, insightful analytics. You don't have to worry about how A/B testing works, how to optimize it, how to test it in real time, because they've already built these solutions for you. Again, you can focus on building your software. So, that being said, once you have that funnel, once you have the users incoming, how do you make the sale? How do you get in contact with them? CRMs. How many of you use CRM? A couple of you. So, for those of you that don't, CRMs are actually a pretty easy and not very time-consuming way to increase your sales, right? They allow you to track your customers, find out detailed information about who they are, what companies they work for, how you've interacted with them in the past, what their behavior is, and tailor your sales to that person, right? If you know that your person works at a, I don't know, pharmaceutical company, you could easily come up with a use case of how a pharmaceutical company could use your product, right? And sell it to them in a more efficient manner. So how many of you blew $5 or more at the casino or hotel? Even on dinner, right? You probably spent $5 on a meal. Yeah, of course. So, I mean, Salesforce.com, right? Their minimum plan is $5 a month. That's obscenely low for this powerful suite of features. You know, they've spent thousands of engineering hours building an extremely powerful CRM that you could spend $5 to use. And the interesting thing about it is that, as with most cloud offerings, you're not really paying for the full feature set. You're paying for what you need. So as your business grows, as your team grows, you can expand these services without having to build them out yourself. You know, you can upgrade to the next plan on Salesforce or any of these CRMs and not have to buy a full new license, not have to worry about which features you're getting because they've already packaged it up. And they've actually found that using a CRM like this has increased sales productivity by over 30% and increased sales by, in many cases, up to 50%, simply for tracking your customers and finding out how you can best interact with them. You know, that's a pretty cheap way to get a massive increase in sales. So, contextually is, for many of you, a lighter weight CRM. Salesforce can be somewhat daunting because it's almost too powerful in many cases. This is one I use personally that simply scans through your email and figures out which contacts are the most valuable and will remind you to follow up with them at certain intervals. So it's pretty simple, but I've found it very useful in keeping in touch and sort of resurrecting old leads. So my area of expertise is really telephony, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why CRMs and phones sort of go hand in hand. So you should as I said, you should really try using a CRM to keep track of your customers. You don't want to miss out on a significant sales channel. Calls are still an extremely effective sales channel. And there are tailored CRMs out there that help you track your calls. RingDNA is one example. And it helps you get a big advantage, right? Because you're no longer dealing purely with email, which is, in many cases, a faceless protocol. You're dealing with real people talking about their needs. And people really do still talk on phones. They actually found that if you called a lead between 1 to 2 minutes after them being generated, your sales increased by 160% over whether they just visited your website. That's a pretty staggering statistic, right? Even though it's software sales, right? Calling them increased your sales. And they're effective. I mean, even compared to clicks, it performs 30 to 50% better. You know, human interactions convert better. It's pure psychology. If I meet you at this conference and I tell you about my product, you're much more likely to use it than if you visit our website. It's not a transactional exchange. You're helping them solve their problems in real time. But really, this is something that you need to track for yourself, right? Use an analytics tool. Use A/B testing. Figure out what works for your product. Because this isn't necessarily a foolproof solution. And I don't know what you'll discover.
Does the CRM software discover the person's phone number from their email address?
Not always. There are some databases you can get on phone numbers, but it's generally, I would say, safer to ask them for it, because then if they don't want to talk to you on the phone, you won't be intruding. Yeah. So, with this being said, right, that calls convert better, people prefer calls. There are a number of services out there you can use to track this data and figure out if it really works for your business. RingDNA is one of them. That's a tailored phone CRM. Salesforce can actually track calls manually. Contactually lets you track phone calls. Even Google Analytics, you can create a event for a phone call, right? You want to know if this specific person has called you about your software. So now that you've sort of gotten that lead and gotten a customer, hopefully, how do you keep in touch? How do you keep them engaged with your product? What happens after someone buys your product? Do they become a recurring customer? Do they tell their friends about it? I don't know, right? So you have to work. It's extra work, but it really does pay off. You need to engage your customers. For example, Walmart Labs, they implemented a SMS deal notification system within about an hour or two, right? It took them that long to build. And it allowed them to instantly notify their customers when a sale was going on. That's huge. If your customer knows at that moment, they can make an impulse buy and get your product. They can figure out that maybe they wouldn't have thought about it for a month, right? But at that moment, they will be thinking about your product. They'll be foremost in their mind. In fact, Airbnb, how many of you are familiar with Airbnb? It's a neat service. Basically, it allows you to rent out your apartment, house, or hotel room when you're out of town, and people will pay you to stay in it. So they have a mobile app, and they actually were able to use push notifications to increase their response rate by 300% and increase their booking rate by 800%, simply by using a push notification, which is that sort of little pop-up you get on your phone that says, something happened in this app. And they use a service called Urban Airship, right? It's a cloud service. They didn't have to build this themselves. Yeah.
Jonathan, you probably mean the phone tracking happens if the person uses a VoIP phone, not if they just pick up the desk phone.
No, I mean, you can absolutely manually enter that data into most CRMs. Yeah. It's more automated. Like RingDNA will actually generate a phone number for you that they track, but you can absolutely use your existing phone and just enter it in. So engage your users, right? You want to increase those sales, increase that on-the-spot sort of buying, right? You want people to be constantly thinking about your product. Even if it's a desktop offering, right? You want to stay in touch, keep your company in their mind. And this works as well for app distribution. I mean, how many of you have ever gone to a website, looked up a mobile app, and then forgotten to download it 2 hours later? I mean, I do that all the time. And essentially, that's a huge loss for the business. Belly, for example, is a deal site, and they have a mobile app that they were able to double the download rate of simply by providing an SMS form up there. So you put your phone number in, they text you a link to the app, and that doubled their download rate. You know, that's an extremely low customer acquisition cost, and it's a really low barrier to entry for getting your program out there. So notifications and sort of instant contact are great, but email really is still the primary method of communication on the web, right? You probably get hundreds of emails, I know I do. And spam is an increasing problem. You don't want your emails to go to someone and never be read, never be seen. Even if they might want to read your email, you know, most people don't check their spam mailbox for sales promotions. So there are services like SendGrid and MailChimp that have solved this problem, right? They know how to comply with the hundreds of spam regulations. They know how to set up a robust email server that doesn't go down. I mean, I'm sure many of you have maintained your own email server. I know I have, and it's extremely complicated. You know, you can absolutely get it to work, but I don't know how many of you know what your deliverability rate is. I don't know how many of you know what your uptime rate is. But with SendGrid, at least, they were able to achieve 95% deliverability. That's 95% of all emails. That's billions of emails sent through their service, reaching a user's inbox and not their spam folder. And it's cheap, right? It's $10 a month for 40,000 emails. Most of you probably don't send that many. I mean, I know I personally don't from my applications. And again, it allows you to think about your program and not these sort of parallel services that supplement it. So there are a number of these notification services that really help you keep in touch with your customers. They're powerful, they're affordable, and they allow you to focus, you know, that you don't have to think about all of these weird systems that might be beyond your control. So, lastly, I'd like to talk about customer support. How many of you do customer support? That could be just answering emails. It should be all of you. But how many of you really invest in it? How many make it key to your business, right? And you should all still have your hands up, because support is extremely powerful in engaging and retaining your customers. You don't just want to make a sale once. You want to make a sale every time you release a new product. You want to make a sale to your customers' friends, their colleagues, people they meet on the street, right? If people really love your product and really get a good feeling from your support, they're going to spread it word of mouth, and that's still the most effective marketing channel. And I'm assuming that you, in some sense or another, love your users, right? Maybe it's just for the money, but you want them to be happy with your product. And in that sense, you want to give them what you want. Forrester research has actually found that consumers still prefer phone calls to email and tickets on the web, right? That's an interesting piece of data, because you're selling software. You know, you're not selling something that traditionally people talk about. But they're still, as you can tell, almost twice as popular as the other communications methods. You know, email is faceless. Support tickets are faceless. You don't get to interact with a real person. You know, consumers really want to see that you are happy to sell them your product. And of course, time is money, right? You don't want to spend hours on the phone with people who may not even convert, who might be annoying. You know, they're talking on the phone with people about tech support problems is not fun. However, it can increase sales, so it's often necessary evil. But luckily, you know, you have systems like IVRs. I'm sure some of you have them in-house, and they can really reduce time spent in support. And they can also reduce time spent in your ticketing system. How many of you use any type of support tickets? I mean, it's something that keeps track of these issues. Well, lucky for you, there are cloud services that provide this functionality, right? This is a recurring theme here. People have already built robust, scalable ticketing systems so that you don't have to worry about keeping track of all your email and don't have to worry about, keeping in touch with everyone when you need to follow up. Zendesk is a great example. I know some of you use it. It's as cheap as $24 a month, right, for this massive ticketing system that you can only use a subset of if you really want to. And they even include phone support, right? So you can combine whatever method your customer wants to talk to you with.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
We have stayed away from phone support and have had strictly a system for years. And I'm beginning to think that we might want to start introducing phone support. How does a cloud solution like Zendesk, how do they handle phone support for you as far as, do they use their own people for the phone support?
No. So the way they handle it is if someone calls in and you don't pick up, they'll create a ticket for you with a recording of their message.
Oh, okay,
if you do pick up, they could forward it to your work phone, your cell phone. You can even talk on your computer with a headset. And so they do, forward it to someone in your company. They don't handle it for you. They just provide sort of the system there for you to handle tickets.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And there are tons of support services out there. There's Freshdesk, Zendesk, Cerberus, if any of you have heard of that. And they all basically can handle email and phone tickets. You don't have to use one exclusively. OpenVBX is just another open source project. It's written in PHP, and it allows you to essentially drag and drop and create an IVR. So if you want to have press 1 for sales, press 2 for support, that can do that for you with 10 minutes of work. So all of these cloud offerings, right? They're powerful, but they're also pretty affordable. I talked about a lot of prices in here, but if you add it up, it's really less than $100 a month, right, for a massive suite of supplemental tools. You're getting a support desk, a CRM, a email server, an A/B testing suite, a telephony suite, right? And it's all for less than $100 a month. That's a minimal cost to significantly increase your revenue.